Pregnant bear begged a child for help. During Wildfire, what the kid risked had everyone in tears. Let us know where you're watching from. If you love my content, consider supporting it with a super thanks. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. It'll help us to remain in touch with amazing people like you. The orange glow on the horizon grew brighter as the afternoon faded into evening. 10-year-old Noah Bailey stood on the wooden porch of his grandfather's cottage, watching the distant smoke billow into the darkening sky. The air tasted of ash, and somewhere in the distance he could hear the faint wail of sirens. "Noah, come inside now," his grandfather called from the doorway. "The rangers said the fire's moving east. We might need to evacuate soon." "5 more minutes, Grandpa," Noah pleaded, his eyes fixed on the forest edge. The woods behind his grandfather's cottage had always been his playground, a place of adventure and discovery during his summer visits. Now, those same trees stood silhouetted against the smoky sunset, their familiar shapes transformed into ominous shadows. Grandpa Frank sighed but nodded. 5 minutes, then we finish packing the truck." He disappeared back into the cottage, leaving Noah alone with his thoughts and the distant crackling that seemed to grow louder with each passing minute. The cottage sat at the very edge of Pine Hollow, a small mountain community nestled against the vast national forest. Most of the villagers had already evacuated, heeding the early warnings. But Grandpa Frank, stubborn as always, had insisted on staying to secure the cottage that had been in their family for 3 generations. Noah inhaled sharply as a gust of wind carried the acrid smell of burning wood. His eyes stung, and he blinked away tears. That's when he noticed a strange movement at the tree line. Something large and dark was emerging from the forest, moving with an uneven, desperate gait. At first, Noah thought it was a shadow, a trick of light playing against the smoke. But as the shape drew closer, he realized it was a bear, a massive black bear stumbling toward the cottage. Its fur was singed in patches, and it moved with obvious pain. Noah's heart hammered against his ribs. He'd seen bears before, but always from the safety of Grandpa's truck. Never this close and never alone. His feet felt rooted to the porch as fear kept him frozen in place. The bear stopped about 30 feet from the cottage, swaying slightly. That's when Noah noticed her swollen belly. She was pregnant, carrying the new life even as the forest burned around her. The bear's eyes, surprisingly intelligent and filled with something Noah could only describe as desperation, locked onto his. She let out a low, rumbling sound. Not a growl of threat, but something that sent shivers down Noah's spine for an entirely different reason. It sounded almost like a plea. "Grandpa," Noah called, his voice barely above a whisper. When no answer came, he called again, louder this time. "Grandpa Frank." The bear took another faltering step forward, then collapsed onto her side, her breathing labored and quick. Noah could see her sides heaving with each breath, could see the exhaustion in every line of her massive body. Smoke swirled around them both, the air growing thicker by the minute. Against every instinct screaming at him to run inside, Noah took a single step down from the porch. The bear's eyes never left his face. Another low sound escaped her, softer this time but just as desperate. "Noah, what are you—" Grandpa Frank's voice cut through the air as he emerged from the cottage, stopping short when he saw the scene before him. "Son, don't move," he whispered urgently. "That's a wild animal in distress, the most dangerous kind." But Noah wasn't listening. Something in the bear's eyes had touched something deep within him, a connection he couldn't explain but felt with absolute certainty. "She needs help, Grandpa," he said, his voice steadier than he felt. "She's asking for help." The wind shifted suddenly, bringing with it a wave of heat and the unmistakable roar of approaching flames. The fire was moving faster than anyone had predicted. In the distance, tree after tree caught fire, like matchsticks being lit in rapid succession. The bear tried to rise but fell back, her strength failing. A soft, keening sound escaped her throat as she looked toward the burning forest, then back at Noah. In that moment, as ash fell like gray snow around them and the world seemed to hold its breath, Noah Bailey made a decision that would change everything. "We have to help her, Grandpa," he said, taking another step forward. "Please." The crackling of the approaching fire grew louder, like a hungry beast devouring everything in its path. Time was running out. For them, for the bear, for the unborn cub she carried. And in the space between heartbeats, a small boy stood his ground, refusing to turn away from a creature in need, even as the world burned around them. Grandpa Frank's weathered face hardened as he looked from his grandson to the bear and back again. The decades he'd spent in these mountains had taught him respect for wild animals and caution. But he'd never seen anything like this. Never seen a wild bear approach humans this way, with what looked almost like purpose. "Noah, that's not a stray dog," he said firmly, moving slowly down the porch steps to stand beside his grandson. "That's a wild bear that could kill us both without trying." "Look at her, Grandpa," Noah insisted, pointing to the bear's singed fur and heaving sides. "She's hurt, and she's going to have a baby. We can't just leave her." The bear's eyes, dark and intelligent, shifted from Noah to Grandpa Frank. Another low sound rumbled from her throat, not threatening, but urgent. Frank had lived in these mountains for 63 years, had encountered bears dozens of times, but had never heard a sound quite like that. A loud crack split the air as a tree at the forest edge succumbed to the flames. Sparks showered down, landing dangerously close to the dry grass surrounding the cottage. The fire was no longer a distant threat. It was upon them. "We need to go," Frank said urgently, grabbing Noah's arm. "Now!" Noah pulled away, his young face set with a determination that reminded Frank so much of Noah's mother, his daughter, who had always been too stubborn for her own good. "If we leave now, she'll die. Her baby will die." The bear tried once more to stand but couldn't manage it. Her eyes never left Noah's face, and in them Frank saw something he couldn't explain, something that seemed to transcend the natural barrier between human and animal. It was as if she understood exactly what was happening, exactly what was at stake. "Noah, even if we wanted to help, what could we possibly do? She must weigh 500 pounds. Another sharp crack echoed from the forest, followed by the terrible groaning of a falling tree. The orange glow was brighter now, illuminating the scene with an otherworldly light. They had minutes, not hours. Noah was already moving, grabbing the garden hose attached to the side of the cottage. "We can cool her down first," he said, turning on the water. "Then maybe she can walk with us." "Walk with us? Son, have you lost your—" "Trust me, Grandpa," Noah interrupted, his voice cracking with emotion. "Please." Frank looked at his grandson, this boy who'd always had a special way with animals, who seemed to understand creatures in a way most humans never could. Then he looked at the bear, at her pleading eyes and swollen belly, at the life she was fighting so desperately to protect. 2 minutes, he said finally. Then we're all leaving, one way or another. Noah didn't waste a second. He approached the bear cautiously, hose in hand, speaking in soft, soothing tones. "It's okay," he murmured. "We're going to help you. You're going to be okay." To Frank's astonishment, the bear remained still as Noah drew closer, her eyes fixed on the boy with what could only be described as trust. When the cool water touched her singed fur, she flinched slightly but didn't move away. Instead, she seemed to lean into it, as if understanding that this small human was trying to help. From the main road came the sound of a vehicle's horn. 3 short blasts, the signal they'd arranged with the fire chief. Their last warning. "Noah," Frank called urgently, "time's up." But Noah was already turning off the water, his small face streaked with soot and determination. "She's cooled down now. I think she can walk." He approached the bear's massive head, stopping just inches away. Frank's heart nearly stopped as his grandson knelt beside the wild animal. "We have to go now," Noah said softly to the bear, as if she could understand every word. "Can you get up? We'll help you find somewhere safe." To Frank's utter disbelief, the bear's eyes seemed to focus with new clarity. With obvious effort, she rolled onto her chest, then pushed herself up onto all fours. She swayed momentarily but remained standing, her sides still heaving with exertion. "Noah Bailey," Frank whispered, "I don't know if you're the bravest or the craziest child I've ever known." A small smile flickered across Noah's face. "Maybe both," he suggested, then turned serious again. "The creek, Grandpa. If we can get her to the creek—" Frank nodded, understanding immediately. The creek that ran behind the community center was wide and deep enough that the fire wouldn't easily jump it. If they could make it there, they might all have a chance. "Get in the truck," he said, making a split-second decision that went against all common sense but somehow felt right. "We'll drive as close as we can to the creek, then walk the rest of the way." Noah's face lit up with relief. "Thank you, Grandpa." As they hurried to the old pickup truck parked beside the cottage, Frank cast one last glance at the bear. She was watching them intently, as if waiting to see what would happen next. The wind shifted again, carrying with it a fresh surge of heat and the unmistakable smell of approaching fire. "Do you think she'll follow us?" Frank asked as he started the engine. Noah looked back at the bear, meeting her gaze across the yard. "She will," he said with absolute certainty. "She knows we're trying to help." As the truck pulled away from the cottage, moving slowly down the gravel driveway, Frank checked the rearview mirror. What he saw made his breath catch in his throat. The bear was following, moving with painful determination, her huge body silhouetted against the fiery glow of the burning forest. It was a sight Frank Bailey knew he would never forget. A wild creature, driven by the most primal instinct of all, putting her trust in the hands of humans. Behind them, the first flames reached the edge of the cottage yard. Before them lay an uncertain path to safety. And between those 2 points moved an unlikely trio: an old man, a young boy, and a pregnant bear, connected by something deeper than words could express. The road to the community center was eerily deserted, the usual summer traffic replaced by an oppressive silence broken only by the distant roar of the fire. Frank drove slowly, constantly checking the rearview mirror to make sure the bear was still following. To his amazement, she was maintaining a steady pace about 30 yards behind the truck. "She's staying with us," Noah said, his face pressed against the passenger window. "I knew she would." Frank gripped the steering wheel tighter, torn between pride in his grandson's compassion and fear for what might happen next. "Noah, I need you to understand something. When we get to the creek, if there are other people there—" He trailed off, unable to find the right words. "They'll help us, Grandpa," Noah said, with the simple confidence of a child. "They'll see she's not dangerous. It's not that simple, son." Frank shook his head. "Most folks won't see what you see. They'll just see a wild bear near their families. Noah's brow furrowed, but before he could respond, a flash of movement caught their attention. Through the trees to their right, they glimpsed the fire jumping from treetop to treetop, racing parallel to the road they were on. The flames seemed to be chasing them, a hungry predator closing in on its prey. "It's moving faster than I thought," Frank muttered, pressing down on the accelerator. Behind them, the bear let out a distressed sound, her pace faltering as she struggled to keep up. Noah twisted in his seat to look back at her. "She can't go any faster, Grandpa," he said urgently. "We need to slow down." Frank hesitated, glancing at the advancing fire. Every instinct told him to drive faster, to get his grandson to safety as quickly as possible. But he couldn't ignore the pleading in Noah's voice, or the fact that they'd already made the decision to help the bear. He eased off the gas, allowing the truck to slow. "We've got about a mile to go before we reach the creek access road," he said. "If the fire jumps ahead of us—" "It won't," Noah said with such certainty that Frank almost believed him. As they approached the turnoff for the creek access road, Frank spotted flashing lights ahead. Fire trucks and emergency vehicles gathered at the community center. The firefighters had established a control line, using the creek as a natural barrier to protect the township buildings. "There are a lot of people there," Frank warned, turning onto the narrow dirt road that led down to the creek's edge. "And they might not understand about our friend." Noah nodded, his young face suddenly looking much older than his 10 years. "I'll explain it to them. I'll make them understand." The truck bumped along the rutted path, descending toward the water. In the distance, Frank could make out figures moving near the creek, firefighters preparing hoses, volunteers filling sandbags. When they spotted the approaching truck, several people waved, clearly relieved to see more evacuees making it to safety. Frank pulled to a stop about 50 yards from the creek bank. "Wait here," he told Noah. "I need to talk to the fire chief first before—" A shout from behind the truck interrupted him. "Bear! There's a bear coming down the road!" Frank's heart sank as he looked in the rearview mirror. The bear had emerged from the tree line, still doggedly following their truck. In the open area near the creek, she was fully visible, and causing exactly the reaction he'd feared. People were running, shouting warnings. A firefighter reached for his radio, barking urgent commands. In the midst of the chaos, Noah flung open the truck door and jumped out. "Noah!" Frank called, scrambling after him. "Wait!" But Noah was already running, not away from the bear, but toward her. He positioned himself between the frightened animal and the crowd of people, his small arms spread wide as if to shield her. "Don't hurt her," he shouted, his voice surprisingly strong for a 10-year-old. "She needs our help." The fire chief, a burly man named Sam Hollister who'd known Frank for decades, approached cautiously. "Frank, get your boy away from that bear," he called, his hand hovering near the sidearm he carried. "It's not what you think, Sam," Frank said, moving slowly to stand beside his grandson. His heart was pounding, but seeing Noah's courage, he couldn't do any less. "The bear came to us for help. She's pregnant and hurt from the fire." Sam's eyes widened in disbelief. "Have you both lost your minds? That's a wild animal, Frank." "Look at her, Chief Hollister," Noah pleaded, pointing to the bear's swollen belly and singed fur. "She's going to have a baby. She came to us because she had nowhere else to go." The bear had stopped about 20 feet away, her sides heaving with exhaustion. The long walk had clearly taken its toll on her already weakened body. She made no threatening moves, merely watched the humans with those same intelligent eyes that had convinced Frank to help her in the first place. A murmur ran through the crowd that had gathered at a safe distance. People were pointing, whispering. Frank could hear the disbelief, the fear, but also something else. Curiosity, wonder. "I've been a firefighter in these mountains for 25 years, Sam said, shaking his head. "Never seen anything like this. She followed us all the way from our cottage," Frank explained. "Walked right behind our truck like she knew we were trying to help her." The bear swayed slightly, her strength visibly failing. She lowered herself to the ground, still keeping her eyes on Noah. A soft, plaintive sound escaped her throat, the same sound that had first captured Noah's attention back at the cottage. "She's exhausted," Noah said, his voice breaking. "And scared. Please, can't we help her?" A woman stepped forward from the crowd. Doctor Meredith Chen, the local veterinarian who'd retired the previous year. She studied the bear with professional interest, keeping a respectful distance. "The bear is clearly in distress," she said, addressing the fire chief. "And the boy is right. She appears to be pregnant, probably in her 3rd trimester, judging by her size." "So, what are we supposed to do, Doc?" Sam asked, frustration evident in his voice. "We've got a wildfire bearing down on us, a town to protect, and now a pregnant bear that apparently thinks she's a pet?" "Not a pet," Noah insisted. "She's asking for help. There's a difference." Dr. Chen's face softened as she looked at Noah. "You know, in my 40 years of veterinary practice, I've seen some remarkable things between humans and animals, things that defy explanation." She turned to the fire chief. "Let me take a closer look at her. If she's allowing the boy this close, she might let me examine her too." Sam hesitated, clearly torn between his duty to public safety and the extraordinary scene unfolding before him. "Frank, you vouch for this." Frank nodded. "I wouldn't have believed it if I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, Sam. But there's something different about this bear, something special." The tension in the air was palpable as Dr. Chen slowly approached the bear, speaking in the same soft, soothing tones that Noah had used. The crowd held its collective breath. Even the firefighters had stopped their preparations, all eyes on the unusual tableau. To everyone's amazement, the bear remained calm as Dr. Chen knelt beside her, carefully examining her without touching. "She's definitely pregnant," the veterinarian confirmed after a moment. "And she's showing signs of smoke inhalation. The fur on her back and flanks is singed, but I don't see any serious burns. She needs water and rest." "We can't just let a wild bear hang around here," Sam protested, though his voice had lost some of its edge. "What about when she recovers? What about when the cub comes?" "One problem at a time, Chief," Dr. Chen said calmly. "Right now, this animal needs help, and she's not showing any aggression. In fact, she's showing remarkable trust." A sudden crackling sound from the forest cut through the conversation. All heads turned toward the eastern ridge, where a new plume of smoke was rising. The fire had jumped a containment line somewhere and was advancing faster than predicted. "We need to move everyone further downstream," Sam ordered, his voice snapping back to its authoritative tone. "The fire's picking up speed with the evening wind." In the commotion that followed, Noah stayed firmly by the bear's side, his small hand hovering just inches from her massive head. "What about her?" he asked, his eyes filling with tears. "We can't leave her now." Frank looked at his grandson, this boy who seemed so much like his late grandmother, with her unfailing compassion and stubborn determination. Then he looked at Dr. Chen, who was already deep in conversation with Sam, gesturing emphatically toward the bear. "We'll figure something out," Frank promised, placing a hand on Noah's shoulder. "We've come this far together. We won't abandon her now." As if understanding his words, the bear made a soft huffing sound. She raised her massive head slightly, her eyes meeting Frank's with that same unsettling intelligence. For the first time, Frank felt what Noah had clearly felt from the beginning, a connection that transcended the normal boundaries between human and wild animal. "Grandpa," Noah whispered, his voice suddenly urgent. "Look." Frank followed his grandson's pointing finger and felt his breath catch. The bear was struggling to stand, her attention now focused on something beyond them. Following her gaze, Frank spotted movement at the edge of the forest, a flash of dark fur slipping between the trees. "Another bear," someone in the crowd gasped. Instantly, the tension returned, multiplied tenfold. One bear was an anomaly, possibly explainable. Two bears approaching humans deliberately was something else entirely. The pregnant bear let out a different sound now, a low call that was neither threatening nor fearful. It was almost welcoming. From the tree line emerged another bear, smaller but still formidable. It moved with hesitation, clearly torn between fear of the humans and something else drawing it forward. And then Frank understood. "It's her mate," he said softly. "He's been following her." Noah's eyes widened. He came to find her. The male bear paused at the edge of the clearing, clearly more wary of humans than his pregnant mate had been. He rose briefly on his hind legs, sniffing the air, assessing the situation with dark, intelligent eyes. "Everyone stay calm," Sam ordered, though his own voice betrayed his nervousness. No sudden movements. The pregnant bear called again, and this time the sound held an unmistakable note of recognition, perhaps even relief. The male bear dropped to all fours and took a tentative step forward. What happened next would be retold in Pine Hollow for generations to come. Noah, defying all logic and safety protocols, stepped away from the pregnant bear and walked slowly toward the newcomer. Frank tried to call out, to stop him, but the words stuck in his throat. "It's okay," Noah said softly, addressing the male bear as if they were old friends meeting after a long separation. "We're helping her. She's safe." The male bear froze, his attention locked on the small human approaching him. A low growl rumbled in his chest, a warning that everyone understood. "Noah," Frank managed finally, his voice strangled with fear. "Son, don't." But Noah didn't stop. He kept walking, slow and steady, until he was halfway between the two bears. Then he simply stood there, a small figure backlit by the setting sun, his posture radiating a calm confidence that seemed impossible for a child his age. "I think they got separated by the fire," he called back to the adults, his voice carrying clearly across the suddenly silent clearing. "He's been looking for her." The male bear shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable with Noah's proximity but making no aggressive move. Behind Noah, the pregnant bear let out another soft call, and the male's ears pricked forward, his attention divided between the potential threat of the boy and the familiar sound of his mate. Dr. Chen moved to Frank's side, her face pale but composed. "I've never seen anything like this," she murmured. "This kind of behavior in wild bears, it's unprecedented." "Should we tranquilize them?" Sam asked, his hand still hovering near his sidearm. "No," Dr. Chen said firmly. "That kind of stress could trigger premature labor in the female, and I think we need to let this play out. The boy seems to have some kind of connection with them." Frank wanted to rush forward, to grab Noah and pull him to safety, but something held him back, the same instinct that had told him to trust Noah's judgment back at the cottage. His grandson had seen something in these animals that the rest of them were only beginning to understand. In the tense silence, Noah did something that made every heart in the clearing skip a beat. He sat down on the ground, cross-legged, directly between the two bears, and then he began to speak, his voice too low for the watching adults to hear. For what seemed like an eternity, nothing happened. The male bear remained frozen, watching. The pregnant female lay still, her eyes fixed on her mate. And between them sat a 10-year-old boy, somehow mediating a reunion that defied all natural laws. Then, slowly, the male bear began to move, not toward Noah, but in a wide circle around him, giving the boy a respectful distance as he made his way toward his mate. When he reached her, he nuzzled her gently, making soft sounds that carried across the clearing. A collective sigh of relief rippled through the onlookers. Noah remained seated for a moment longer, then stood and walked calmly back to his grandfather, a small smile playing on his lips. "She was looking for him too," he said simply. "That's why she came to us. She knew she couldn't find him alone, not with the fire." Frank wrapped his arms around his grandson, torn between wanting to scold him for taking such a risk and overwhelming pride in his extraordinary compassion and courage. "Noah Bailey," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion, "you are something else." "What do we do now?" someone asked, breaking the spell that seemed to have fallen over the gathering. Sam Hollister rubbed his beard, staring at the two bears who were now huddled together at the edge of the clearing. "Well," he said finally, "I guess we've got 2 bears to evacuate now." A nervous laugh rippled through the crowd. The absurdity of the situation was not lost on anyone. In the midst of evacuating an entire town, they were now concerned with the safe passage of 2 wild bears. "We could try to create a safe corridor for them to move further downstream," Dr. Chen suggested. "If they're willing to follow the boy's truck again." As the adults debated the best course of action, a sudden crack of thunder broke overhead. Everyone looked up in surprise. There had been no forecast of rain. The clouds above, already dark with smoke, seemed to have thickened further. "Is that—" "Rain," Frank confirmed, feeling the first heavy drops on his face. "A summer thunderstorm." Within minutes, the sporadic drops became a steady downpour. Steam rose from the forest where the rain met the advancing fire, creating an otherworldly mist that drifted across the clearing. The firefighters looked at each other in disbelief, then broke into spontaneous cheers. "It won't stop the fire completely," Sam cautioned, though he couldn't keep the hope from his voice. "But it'll slow it down, give us a fighting chance." Noah turned his face to the sky, letting the rain wash away the soot and fear of the past hours. When he looked back at the bears, he saw that the male had helped his mate to her feet. They stood together at the edge of the clearing, watching the humans with those same intelligent eyes. "They're going to be okay now," Noah said, his voice filled with quiet certainty. "They can find their own way to safety." As if confirming his words, the male bear nudged his mate gently. Together, they turned and began to move along the creek bank, away from both the fire and the human gathering. Before disappearing into the underbrush, the pregnant bear paused, looking back at Noah one last time. In that final gaze was something that even the most skeptical observer couldn't deny: recognition, gratitude, a connection that transcended species. And then they were gone, swallowed by the rain and mist, leaving behind a story that would become legend in Pine Hollow. The thunderstorm continued through the night, a blessing from nature that allowed the firefighters to gain ground against the wildfire. By morning, the immediate threat to the town had passed, though the forest would bear the scars for years to come. As dawn broke, Frank and Noah stood on the porch of the community center, watching the sun rise through clouds of steam and smoke. They'd spent the night there with other evacuees, sleeping on cots in the main hall, surrounded by neighbors who now looked at Noah with a mix of awe, respect, and lingering disbelief. "Do you think they made it somewhere safe?" Noah asked, leaning against his grandfather's side. Frank wrapped an arm around his grandson's shoulders. "If any bears could find their way through that fire, it's those two," he said. "I have a feeling they're tougher than they look." Noah nodded, satisfied with this answer. But as they turned to go back inside for breakfast, a commotion at the edge of the parking lot caught their attention. "Chief," someone was calling. "Chief Hollister, you need to see this." Frank and Noah followed the gathering crowd to where Sam stood with Dr. Chen, both staring at something on the ground with expressions of wonder. "What is it?" Frank asked, pushing forward. "What's happened?" Dr. Chen looked up, her face alive with excitement. "Tracks," she said simply, pointing to the mud at the edge of the lot. "Bear tracks. They came back during the night." Clear in the rain-softened earth were the unmistakable prints of two bears, one set larger and deeper than the other. They circled the community center once, passing especially close to the window of the room where Noah had slept, before disappearing back into the forest. "They came to say goodbye," Noah whispered, kneeling to touch one of the massive prints, "to let us know they were okay." Around him, adults exchanged glances, some skeptical, some wondering, some deeply moved. But no one contradicted him. After what they'd witnessed the day before, who could say what was possible between a boy and a bear? As the morning progressed, news crews arrived, drawn by reports of the unusual bear encounter during the evacuation. Noah found himself the center of attention, bombarded with questions about his experience. "I didn't do anything special," he insisted each time. "She asked for help and I listened, that's all." But everyone who had been present knew it was more than that, much more. By midday, wildlife biologists from the state university had arrived, eager to document what they were already calling an unprecedented case of interspecies communication. They set up cameras along the creek, hoping for another glimpse of the remarkable bears. "You've started quite a stir," Frank told his grandson as they sat together on a fallen log, watching the scientists scurry about with their equipment. "How does it feel to be famous?" Noah shrugged, picking at a piece of bark. "I don't care about that," he said. "I just want to know if she's going to have her baby soon, and if they'll be safe." Frank knelt beside his grandson. "I reckon they'll be just fine," he said, squeezing Noah's shoulder. "Wildlife experts say that bears are pretty good at recovering from these things, and they've got each other now." Noah nodded, still staring at the forest edge as if hoping for one more glimpse of his unusual friends. "Do you think anyone will believe us about how she asked for help?" "Some will, some won't," Frank admitted. "But we know what happened, and that's what matters." As the morning wore on, there was a flurry of activity at the command center. Reports came in that the rain had indeed helped control the fire's spread. While the forest had suffered significant damage, Pine Hollow itself had been spared the worst. By early afternoon, some residents were being allowed to return to their homes in the western part of town, the area farthest from the fire's path. Frank and Noah, however, would have to wait. Their cottage had been directly in the fire's path before the rain came. "Grandpa," Noah said as they helped pack up emergency supplies at the community center, "even if the cottage is gone, I'm glad we stayed long enough to help her." Frank ruffled his grandson's hair, his heart swelling with pride. "Me too, son, me too." A commotion at the center's entrance drew their attention. Dr. Chen burst through the doors, her face flushed with excitement. "They found them," she announced to no one in particular, then spotted Frank and Noah. "They found your bears." Noah dropped the blanket he was folding and ran to her. "Where? Are they okay?" The veterinarian's eyes sparkled. "The wildlife team set up cameras along the creek, about 2 miles downstream. They've been monitoring them all morning." She pulled out her phone and showed them a grainy image, a small cave in a rocky outcropping near the water, and two dark shapes just visible inside. "They've set up a perimeter to keep people away," she explained. "But the biologists are absolutely fascinated. They've never documented behavior like this in wild bears." "Can we see them?" Noah asked, his voice trembling with hope. Dr. Chen looked to Frank, raising an eyebrow in question. Frank hesitated, thinking of the still smoldering forest, the unpredictability of wild animals, the responsibility of his daughter's son in his care. But then he thought of the trust in the bear's eyes, the courage in Noah's heart, and the extraordinary connection they'd all witnessed. "I suppose a quick visit wouldn't hurt," he said finally, "as long as we stay at a safe distance." Noah's face lit up like the sun breaking through storm clouds. An hour later, they stood with Dr. Chen and a wildlife biologist named Marcus on a ridge overlooking the small cave. They were keeping well back, observing through binoculars, careful not to disturb the bears who had found refuge there. "It's remarkable," Marcus whispered, adjusting his binoculars. "In 20 years of studying black bears, I've never seen anything like this. They should be hiding deep in the woods, as far from humans as possible, especially with her so close to giving birth." "But they're not afraid of us," Noah said simply. Marcus glanced at the boy with newfound respect. "No, they're not. And that's what's so extraordinary." Through his own binoculars, Frank could see the male bear stationed protectively at the cave entrance, while his mate rested inside. Occasionally, the male would raise his head, sniffing the air, ensuring their continued safety. "How long before she has her cub?" Noah asked. Dr. Chen shrugged. "It's hard to say with wild bears. Could be days, could be weeks. But she picked a good spot. Sheltered, close to water, relatively safe from the fire's aftermath." As they watched, the male bear suddenly stood up on his hind legs, sniffing the air more intently. His head turned in their direction, and for a moment, Frank could have sworn the animal was looking directly at them. At Noah specifically. "He knows we're here," Noah whispered, a smile spreading across his face. The bear dropped back to all fours and surprised everyone by taking a few steps away from the cave, toward the ridge where they stood. He stopped, still keeping a safe distance from both the humans and his mate, and let out a soft huff of air, not threatening, but almost like an acknowledgement. Noah raised his hand in a small wave. The bear watched for a moment longer, then turned and ambled back to the cave entrance, resuming his protective stance. That was... Marcus struggled for words. "Unprecedented," he finished, shaking his head in amazement. They stayed for another half hour, observing quietly, before Dr. Chen suggested they head back. The storm clouds were gathering again, and no one wanted to be caught in the forest if another downpour began. As they turned to leave, Noah took one last look at the cave. "Goodbye," he whispered, too softly for anyone but Frank to hear. "Take good care of each other." The walk back to the community center was mostly silent, each person lost in their own thoughts about what they'd witnessed. Frank kept his arm around Noah's shoulders, feeling a mix of emotions he couldn't quite name. Pride, wonder, gratitude, and something like awe at the depths of connection possible in this world. When they reached the parking lot, Sam Hollister was waiting for them, his expression somber. Frank's heart sank, anticipating bad news about their cottage. "Just got back from your place, Frank," the fire chief said, confirming his fears. "The main structure's still standing, but there's significant damage to the west side and the roof. Won't be livable for a while." Frank nodded, accepting the news with resignation. "We've got insurance, and we've got each other. That's what matters." Noah squeezed his grandfather's hand in silent support. "There's something else," Sam continued, his expression shifting to something Frank couldn't quite read. When we were assessing the damage, we found something unusual." "Unusual how?" Frank asked, suddenly alert. Sam ran a hand through his salt and pepper hair. "In your backyard, near where you said the bear first approached, there's a den, a bear's den. It looks like it's been there a while, maybe even years, hidden in that grove of pines behind your shed." Frank and Noah exchanged startled glances. "Are you saying—" Frank couldn't even finish the question. "I'm saying your bear might not have been a stranger," Sam replied. "The wildlife folks think she might have been living on your property, or at least very near it, for some time now. Watching you, maybe even feeling some kind of, I don't know, connection." Noah's eyes widened. "That's why she came to us," he whispered. "She knew us." The implication hung in the air between them, that the extraordinary connection they'd felt hadn't been a random occurrence or miracle, but something that had been building silently, invisibly, over years of shared space and mutual observation. "The world's a more mysterious place than we give it credit for," Dr. Chen said softly, placing a hand on Noah's shoulder. "Sometimes the barriers we think exist between species are more permeable than we realize." As evening approached, the community gathered for a meal in the center's cafeteria. The atmosphere was subdued but hopeful. Many had lost homes and possessions, but no lives had been claimed by the fire. Recovery would take time, but it would come. Throughout the meal, people kept approaching Noah and Frank, asking about the bears, expressing wonder and disbelief and, increasingly, admiration for the boy who had somehow bridged the gap between human and wild animal. Noah answered their questions patiently, but Frank could tell he was growing tired of the attention. After dinner, as twilight settled over the mountains, they slipped outside for some fresh air, finding a quiet bench behind the building. "You've become quite the hero," Frank observed, watching his grandson's profile in the fading light. Noah shook his head. "I'm not a hero, Grandpa. I just did what anyone would do if they really saw her, really understood what she was asking." Frank smiled at the simplicity of this statement, the unquestioning compassion behind it. "Maybe that's what makes someone a hero, son, seeing what others miss and having the courage to act on it." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars appear one by one above the smoke-hazed mountains. "Grandpa," Noah said finally, his voice thoughtful, "do you think she'll stay in that cave to have her baby?" "Probably. It seems like a safe place," Frank replied, putting his arm around the boy's shoulders. "I wish we could be there when it happens," Noah said softly. Frank was about to respond when his phone vibrated in his pocket. He pulled it out, surprised to see Dr. Chen's name on the screen. They'd exchanged numbers earlier that day when arranging to visit the bears. "Hello?" he answered. "Frank," Dr. Chen's voice came through, breathless with excitement. "How fast can you and Noah get back here?" "It's happening, right now." Frank's heart skipped a beat. "The cub?" "Yes. The wildlife team's cameras caught it starting about 20 minutes ago. Marcus called me immediately." Frank looked at Noah, whose eyes had grown wide with anticipation. "We'll be there in 10 minutes, he said, ending the call. "Come on, son, your bear friend is having her baby." They raced back to the community center where Dr. Chen was already waiting in her Jeep. The drive back to the observation point was a blur of anticipation and wonder. By the time they reached the ridge, dusk had deepened, but powerful spotlights had been set up at a distance to illuminate the cave entrance without disturbing the bears. Marcus met them at the trail, his face alight with professional excitement. "We're witnessing something incredible," he told them as they hurried to the observation point. "Something that's never been documented before." When they reached the ridge, binoculars were pressed into their hands immediately. The scene below took Noah's breath away. The male bear was pacing outside the cave entrance, occasionally looking in, then resuming his protective circuit. Inside, just visible through the cave opening, the pregnant bear was in labor, her massive body contorted with contractions. "She's been at it for about an hour now," Marcus explained in a hushed voice. "First-time mothers can take a while." Noah watched, transfixed, as nature's most ancient miracle unfolded before his eyes. The air around them seemed charged with something powerful. Life, persistence, the unstoppable force of continuation in the face of destruction. Just days ago, the forest had burned. Now, new life was emerging from its ashes. For nearly 2 hours they stood vigil on the ridge, watching through binoculars, speaking only in whispers. The small group of observers had grown to include several wildlife biologists, a local reporter, and even Chief Hollister, who stood back with Frank, occasionally shaking his head in wonder. And then, just as the moon rose full and bright over the mountains, it happened. A tiny, wet bundle emerged, and the mother bear's massive paws, so powerful and potentially dangerous, moved with astonishing gentleness to guide her cub to her side. A collective gasp rose from the watchers on the ridge. The male bear approached the cave entrance, peering in, then let out a soft, rumbling sound that carried clearly through the night air. "He's greeting his cub," Dr. Chen whispered, tears streaming unashamedly down her face. "He's acknowledging his family." Noah lowered his binoculars, his own vision blurred with tears. "She did it," he whispered. "They're safe." As if hearing his voice, the mother bear raised her massive head, looking directly toward the ridge where they stood. Even at that distance, Noah felt the connection snap into place again, that same inexplicable bond that had formed when she first approached their cottage seeking help. In that moment, something profound passed between them. Gratitude, recognition, a shared triumph over the forces that had threatened them all. It was a look that transcended species, that spoke to something ancient and universal, the drive to protect life, to nurture it, to ensure its continuation against all odds. The mother bear lowered her head to her cub, beginning the timeless ritual of cleaning and bonding. The male settled at the cave entrance, a sentinel against the night. Frank wrapped his arm around Noah's shoulders, feeling the boy trembling with emotion. "You did that," he whispered. "You saved them both. You saved that little cub that never would have had a chance to be born." Noah leaned into his grandfather's embrace, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. Around them, the other observers were wiping away tears, clasping hands, sharing in the profound moment they'd been privileged to witness. In the weeks that followed, as Pine Hollow began the slow process of rebuilding, the story of Noah and the bears spread far beyond their mountain community. News crews came from as far away as Seattle and Los Angeles to interview the boy who had somehow communicated with a wild bear, who had understood her plea for help and responded with courage beyond his years. The wildlife team continued to monitor the bear family, reporting that mother and cub were thriving. They named the cub Phoenix, a fitting tribute to its birth from the ashes of destruction. When asked what he thought of the name, Noah simply smiled and said it was perfect. Frank's cottage was eventually rebuilt, stronger than before. The bear den behind the shed was carefully preserved, protected now by a conservation easement that would ensure it remained undisturbed for generations to come. As for Noah, he returned to school that fall with a new sense of purpose. The experience had awakened something in him, a calling, a path that would eventually lead him to become one of the country's foremost wildlife conservationists, specializing in bear behavior and human-wildlife conflict resolution. But that was all in the future. On the last evening before he was to return to his parents in the city, Noah and Frank sat on their newly rebuilt porch, watching the sunset paint the healing forest in shades of gold and amber. "Do you think we'll ever see them again?" Noah asked, his gaze fixed on the tree line where a desperate mother bear had once emerged, seeking help from the most unlikely of allies. Frank considered this for a moment, then nodded slowly. "I think some connections, once made, are never really broken," he said. "They change us, become part of who we are." As if in answer to his words, a distant sound drifted up from the forest, not threatening, not fearful, but a soft, rumbling acknowledgement that seemed to hang in the twilight air like a promise. Noah smiled, recognizing it instantly. "She's still there," he whispered, "still watching over us." "And we'll watch over her," Frank promised, his voice thick with emotion. "Together." As darkness settled over the mountain, grandfather and grandson sat side by side, listening to the ancient song of the forest as it healed and renewed itself. And somewhere in the shadows, a mother bear guided her cub through the first steps of a life that had almost never been. A life saved by the courage of a child who heard a plea that others couldn't understand, and answered it with the purest kind of compassion. It was a story that would be told in Pine Hollow for generations to come, growing with each retelling until it took on the quality of legend. But for those who had witnessed it, who had seen the tears in the eyes of hardened firefighters and skeptical scientists, who had felt the connection between a boy and a bear that defied all explanation, it would always remain something more valuable than legend. It would remain the truth. A truth about the bonds that can form between the most unlikely creatures when compassion overcomes fear, when understanding transcends difference, and when a small act of courage changes not just one life, but many. And in a forest reborn from ashes, a bear and her cub thrived, carrying within them the memory of the day when, against all odds, they had found help in the most unexpected of places, in the fearless heart of a child who refused to look away when he was needed most.